My name is Avery Clark. I'm 29 years old, an architect based in Portland, and until yesterday, I thought my brother Ethan and I had reached some sort of silent truce after our father passed away. But then I got the call. It was around 7. Kim Senpi. The sun had just dipped behind the buildings, casting long shadows through my apartment windows. I was reviewing designs for a renovation project when my phone lit up. Ethan Clark. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. We hadn't spoken much since the funeral aside from some cold logistical texts about Dad's will and taxes. I stared at the screen for a second, debating whether to pick up. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hey," I said. "Hey, little brother." Ethan replied, his voice too chipper, too smooth. I could already hear the smirk. "Just wanted to give you a heads up. I sold the cabin." I blinked. "You... what?" "The Crescent Lake place," he said, as if I needed clarification. "Got a great offer. The Harpers. They're from Seattle cash buyers. No contingencies. Closing next Friday." The words dropped like ice cubes down my spine. "Ethan, you can't sell the cabin," I said, slowly, deliberately. "It's not just yours." "Well, technically it is," he said. "The will left equal shares to both of us, but let's be honest, you've barely used it in years. And I've been the one maintaining it." I figured it was time to cut dead weight and put the money to good use. I paused. There were a dozen things I could have said. That he was wrong. That I had already handled things. That our father never trusted him. Not really. But instead, I swallowed the words and kept my voice calm. "Okay," I said. "Thanks for letting me know." He laughed. "That's it? No shouting. No guilt trip. Look at you growing up." I didn't reply. I just ended the call. Then I sat there, phone still in hand, heart pounding. Because what Ethan didn't know, what he'd never thought to check, was that the cabin no longer belonged to him. Rewind 6 months. Dad had just gotten back from the hospital after another round of tests. His pancreatic cancer had progressed faster than we'd hoped. That day, he looked weaker than I'd ever seen him, his once broad shoulders sunken beneath a flannel shirt 2 sizes too big. I visited him every weekend after I found out, driving 2 hours up from Portland to Crescent Lake. One afternoon, he asked me to take a walk with him out on the dock. "You know, your brother's been sniffing around the deed," he said suddenly. I blinked. "What do you mean?" "He thinks I don't notice," Dad continued. "He's been asking Diane for copies of my estate plans, offering to take over the taxes, bringing his real estate buddy by under the guise of checking the roof." I sighed. "That sounds like him." Dad stopped at the edge of the dock and looked out at the water. The lake shimmered in the late afternoon sun. The air smelled of pine smoke and memory. "I want you to have it, Avery," he said. "I want the cabin to stay in the family. The real family, you understand." I did. I always had. So with the help of his longtime friend and attorney Diane Adler, we drafted a quiet sale agreement. Dad signed the quitclaim deed, transferring full ownership to me in exchange for a symbolic $1. He didn't want to fight. He just wanted peace. He never even told Ethan. Now, 6 months later, Ethan had unknowingly tried to sell a property he didn't own. I grabbed the folder Diane had mailed me. Inside were the recorded deed, county filings, and utility transfers, all in my name. All valid. All signed by Walter Clark while fully competent. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Ethan. "Make sure you grab anything sentimental before Tuesday. After that, the Harpers are gutting the kitchen, turning the place into a luxury rental." Lol. Lol. I set the phone down and stared at the photo on my shelf. Me, Dad, and our dog Tiller on the porch of the cabin. Dad had built that porch himself. Every plank, every nail, every railing. He'd even carved our initials into the bottom step when I was 7. That place wasn't just a structure. It was everything he believed in: self-reliance, family, solitude, legacy. Ethan never cared about any of that. He just saw square footage and resale value. I picked up the phone again, this time dialing Diane. "Hello," she answered, her voice clipped but kind. "It's Avery," I said. "Ethan thinks he sold the cabin." She was silent for a beat. Then, "I figured this day would come." "What do we do now?" I asked. "We let him move forward," she said. "Let him dig the hole. Then we bury the sale with the paperwork. But first, document everything." I nodded. "You'll be there." "I'll be there," she said. Let's bring the truth to the table. I hung up. The game had begun, and Ethan was already checkmated. Crescent Lake was never about luxury. No granite countertops. No marble floors. Just Pinewood Creek water, the creak of floorboards and the hum of loons in the morning. Our father, Walter Clark, believed in that kind of simplicity. A former park ranger who spent 30 years protecting the forests of Washington State, Dad wasn't a man of many possessions, but he cherished the ones that held stories. The cabin was at the top of that list. He inherited it from his father, who built it after coming back from the Korean War. It sat quietly by the lake's edge, tucked behind spruce and cedar, its reflection dancing in the water like a memory come alive. To Dad, that cabin was more than wood and nails. It was a symbol of endurance, of legacy, of home. I still remember the first summer we spent there after Mom left. I was 8. Ethan was 14. Dad had packed up our few belongings in the back of the old green pickup and said, "We need some quiet for a while." We thought it was a vacation. But even then I could sense something deeper, something wounded. That summer, Ethan spent most of his time with headphones on, stomping around the forest, like it had personally offended him. He was angry at Mom, at Dad, at life. But me, I fell in love. The cabin became my sanctuary. I learned to fish there, to patch torn screens, to fix a leaking roof, to draw silence from nature like music from a radio. I'd help Dad build a new deck one summer, and the next, we painted the shutters navy blue. He showed me how to make a fire without lighter fluid, how to track deer prints, how to spot osprey above the lake. On Sunday mornings, we'd cook pancakes on the old cast-iron griddle, the one with the burn mark from Grandpa's cigar. We'd eat on the porch in silence, Dad sipping his black coffee, me sipping cocoa with too many marshmallows, the lake stretching before us like a silver plate. Sometimes he'd talk about the trees, or about how his father used to hum while chopping wood. Sometimes he'd say nothing at all, just hand me a mug and sit beside me. Ethan was different. He'd come to the cabin begrudgingly, like it was a punishment. Said it was boring. Said there was no Wi-Fi, no cable, no real people. Even as teenagers, when I'd sneak out at night to stargaze, Ethan would sneak out to find signal on his phone. We were never close, not because he was cruel, just disconnected. He wanted things fast, big, flashy. The city, the cars, the women, the lifestyle. When he turned 18, he left for college and never looked back. Dad never said it, but I could see the disappointment. Every unreturned call, every missed Father's Day, every promise to visit broken. But still, Dad never shut the door on him. I used to think that was weakness. Now I know it was love. When Dad got diagnosed last year, it was Crescent Lake. He wanted not a hospital bed. He didn't ask to be wheeled into a hospice room surrounded by beeping monitors. He asked to go back to the cabin, and I took him there. I took 6 months off work. My firm understood. I told them I needed time for family, for myself. But the truth was, I just needed to be by his side. Those final weeks at the cabin were both the hardest and most precious of my life. Some days were good. We'd sit out on the dock, Dad wrapped in his old ranger's jacket, eyes closed, face turned toward the sun. He'd tell me stories I'd heard 100 times about the bear that wandered too close, or the time he and Grandpa canoed through a storm. Other days, he barely spoke at all, just held my hand or stared out the window. There was one morning after I'd helped him to the porch that he said something I'll never forget. Place only stays alive if someone remembers why it matters. He squeezed my hand, looked me in the eye, and added, "You remember, right?" I nodded. "Always." Ethan showed up once during that time. For exactly 48 hours. He arrived in a new Audi. Didn't bring groceries. Didn't ask how Dad was holding up. Just wandered the cabin with a strange gleam in his eyes. He complimented the layout. Asked about property taxes. Measured the living room. Even took photos of the fireplace. Dad noticed. He wasn't a fool. 2 days later, Ethan was gone. Said work called. Clients in New York. After he left, Dad asked me to call Diane, his lawyer. That was the day he transferred the deed. It's funny how memories build quietly. They don't announce themselves. They live in small things. The creak of a step. The smell of cedar. The way the porch door never quite closes unless you push it twice. The cabin remembered us even when we forgot ourselves. And now it was mine. Legally, emotionally, eternally. So when Ethan called me last night to gloat about selling it, he wasn't just misinformed. He was trespassing on something sacred. And now it was time to protect it. Just like Dad did. Just like he taught me to. I used to believe that blood alone was enough to hold people together. That no matter how far Ethan drifted or how different we became, we'd always find our way back to the same table. That there was something sacred about sharing a last name Clark, even if we didn't share values anymore. I was wrong. Ethan and I had become strangers long before Dad got sick. And in the months leading up to the end, that distance turned into something sharper, something colder, something calculated. It started subtly. Little things. One day, while I was out picking up Dad's prescriptions, Ethan arrived unannounced at the cabin. I came back to find him in the study going through Dad's old file cabinet. He said he was helping organize paperwork, but the man couldn't even locate his own tax returns, let alone ours. I noticed he had pulled out the cabin's original deed and Dad's binder of life insurance documents. I didn't say anything. Not then. But I took the deed and placed it in a locked drawer after he left. A week later, I saw a business card sitting on the kitchen counter. Douglas Raymond Lakeview Realty Group. I turned it over. Scribbled on the back were square footage estimates and a rough value of the property. When I asked Ethan about it, he laughed it off. "Oh, come on!" I was just curious. "Market's wild right now. Can you blame a guy?" I didn't laugh. The wedge between us wasn't new. It started years ago the moment our lives split in opposite directions. After high school, Ethan went off to business school in California, interned at investment firms, jumped into the startup world, built a slick little resume and a big ego to match me. I stayed back, went to community college, then architecture school. I liked blueprints and foundations, things that were built to last. I liked stillness. I liked forests. Ethan liked motion. He liked cities, and noise, and attention. Even at Dad's birthday 2 years ago, he showed up late in a tailored suit, flashing a new Rolex, gifting Dad an iPad and saying, "It's time you modernize, old man." Dad smiled politely, but the iPad sat unopened on the side table for months. There was a morning about 5 weeks before Dad passed that I caught Ethan on the porch with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a hushed but urgent tone. I stayed behind the screen door and listened. "I'm telling you, the location is prime. Lakeside, private access forest trails, all of it. I'm just waiting for paperwork to finalize. Yeah, I'll let you know." "No, it won't be a problem. He's too sentimental to fight me." He was talking about me. He hung up when I stepped outside. "Talking to a client?" I asked casually. "Yup," he replied. "Big account in Seattle." I just nodded, but I knew better. Ethan had never once mentioned real estate clients before. His tone had the oily sheen of a man negotiating a sale. He was circling the cabin like a shark. The more time he spent at the cabin, the more out of place he seemed. He hated the lack of cell signal. He grumbled about the fireplace being too smoky. He scoffed at Dad's old vinyl player. "This belongs in a museum." He even suggested knocking down the treehouse Dad had built when we were kids. "It's a liability," he said. A memory I corrected. He rolled his eyes. One night I found him measuring the windows. For replacement, he said, "If I were you, I'd modernize. These drafts are terrible for resale." I stared at him. "I'm not you," I said. "Clearly." Dad noticed all of it. Even in his weakened state, nothing slipped past him. He waited until Ethan left one evening, then beckoned me over with a frail hand. "He's hungry," Dad whispered. "Not for food. For everything." "I know," I said softly. "I didn't raise him that way." "No, but life did." He squeezed my wrist. "That's why I need you to protect this place. Not just the building, the spirit of it. The memories. The silence. I will." "Promise me, Avery." "I promise." That same week, Dad transferred the deed. He didn't want Ethan to know, not yet. He said the conflict would only poison his final days. So he kept it quiet. Only Diane knew. When we left Diane's office, Dad insisted on one more walk to the dock. His strength was fading. His steps were short-labored. But his eyes lit up when we reached the edge where the water met the sky. "You remember the beaver dam we built out there?" he asked. I smiled. We were so proud of it. Collapsed in a day. Yeah, but you tried again. And again. Until it held. That's how you taught me. He nodded. That's how I need you to be now. The wedge between brothers isn't always made of harsh words. Sometimes it's made of silence. Sometimes it's made of different values, different worlds, different priorities. And sometimes it's made of betrayal so subtle you don't realize it's happening until the foundation cracks. Ethan had already drawn his blueprint for the cabin. He just didn't know mine was stronger and already built. The morning Dad and I signed the transfer, the leaves had just begun to turn. It was early October, and the drive to Diane Adler's office took us along winding forest roads gilded in gold and red. The kind of scenery that made tourists pull over to take pictures, but to us it was just home. Dad insisted on wearing his ranger jacket even though it sagged on his shoulders now. He said it made him feel like himself. Diane had been a family friend for as long as I could remember. She and Dad had gone to high school together, then reconnected when she moved back to town to open her legal practice. She was one of the few people Dad trusted with everything estate finance's secrets. When we stepped into her office that morning, she didn't greet us with small talk. She looked directly at Dad and said, "Are you sure?" He nodded once firmly. Then he glanced at me. "He's the one who'll protect it, not flip it." We sat down, and Diane opened a manila folder that bore my last name. She spoke clearly and kindly, explaining each document. The quitclaim deed. The notarized transfer forms, the affidavit confirming Dad's full capacity. I could see her eyes flicker toward him now and then, gauging his condition. Despite the frailty, Dad was sharp. His signature, though slightly shakier than years past, was deliberate. As he signed the deed, his pen paused briefly at the bottom. He looked at me. "There. Done. You sure you're okay with this?" I asked. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just said, "I'm not okay with what Ethan's become." Then, "This is peace of mind." The whole process took less than an hour, and yet it felt like a passing of the torch. When I signed my name on the receiving line, I felt the weight of what I was taking on. It wasn't just real estate. It was family. It was memory. It was responsibility. "Keep this quiet," Dad said as Diane tucked the completed documents into a folder. No announcements. No confrontations. Just preparation. "Why not update the will too?" I asked. Diane glanced at Dad. "Because if Ethan finds out now," Dad said, "he'll make my final months hell. He'll argue, threaten, push. I just want quiet. But won't he be blindsided later?" "He won't be blindsided. He'll be exposed." There was a sharpness in Dad's voice I rarely heard. A tired kind of justice. "He's already decided what the cabin means to him. I'm just making sure it goes to someone who actually understands what it's worth. Not in dollars, but in decades." Diane handed me the folder as we left. Inside, the recorded deed, the county clerk confirmation, updated utility transfers, and a letter sealed, handwritten by Dad, marked, "For Avery only if necessary." I didn't open it that day. I didn't want to. Holding it felt too final. Back at the cabin that afternoon, Dad sat on the porch for hours, sipping tea and watching the wind sweep through the trees. I stacked firewood, repaired a loose step on the deck. It was a quiet kind of bonding one we'd always had. He didn't mention Ethan again. He didn't have to. 2 weeks later, Ethan texted me from L. Thinking about swinging by the cabin next month. Market's hot. We should talk upgrades. Could turn this place into a serious asset." I didn't reply. He had no idea how serious it already was. I kept everything quiet, just like Dad asked. The title was updated. The county had it on record. Even the insurance was rerouted into my name discreetly without alerting joint beneficiaries. It was all airtight, all legal, all silent. That's how Dad wanted it. No drama, no explosions. Just facts, just signatures, just trust. It was the most intimate betrayal we never had to speak aloud. A father protecting one son from another. A transaction that said everything we weren't ready to admit out loud. That some family members break things they can't rebuild. And some rebuild what they didn't break. 2 months later, Dad passed. He was in the cabin, peaceful, with the wind at the windows and the lake just beyond the trees. Ethan came for the funeral, brought flowers, cried maybe even genuinely, He delivered a eulogy that sounded like it came from a Hallmark card. I stood by the casket, hands folded, the sealed envelope still at home in my drawer. He didn't need to know. Not yet. But now, weeks later, after his smug phone call, after listing the cabin as if it were his to sell, now, he would. The morning of Dad's funeral, the sky looked like it was holding its breath. Low gray clouds hovered over Crescent Lake, threatening to break, but never quite doing it. There was a stillness in the air, like the world itself was trying to remain composed just for him. We held the service outside like he would have wanted. No churches, no chapels, just trees, lake, and sky. We placed his casket near the dock where he used to sit and drink his morning coffee. A simple pine box, a folded ranger jacket on top, no gold trim, no polished handles. He had written it into his final wishes. Keep it simple, no fanfare. Just remember me by the trees. And I tried to do just that. I wore the flannel shirt he always borrowed from me, the faded one with the elbow patch and jeans. I stood near the edge of the crowd next to Diane while the minister read the psalm Dad liked best. But then Ethan arrived. He came late. Of course he did. In a tailored suit that didn't belong anywhere near pine needles or damp soil, Ethan strolled in like a man arriving for a networking gala, not his father's goodbye. His hair was slicked back. His sunglasses cost more than Dad's monthly pension. In his hand was a Starbucks cup, the kind with his name scrawled in marker. He made a show of nodding solemnly to people he barely knew, hugged a few guests too tightly, whispered how hard this has been. I watched him the way you'd watch a staged performance, half in awe, half in horror. When it was his turn to speak, Ethan stepped up to the podium, cleared his throat, and removed his sunglasses with the calculated timing of an actor in a courtroom drama. Walter Clark was a great man. He began, pausing just long enough for effect. A man of principle, of patience. A man who taught me the value of hard work and the importance of family. I looked down. The weight of his hypocrisy pressed harder than the clouds overhead. Ethan barely called Dad in the last 2 years. Barely visited. Barely cared except when it came to assets and inheritance. But now he stood there, voice quivering, wiping a non-existent tear from the corner of his eye, weaving tales of father-son fishing trips he never took and lessons he never learned. I felt my hands clench into fists. Diane noticed and gently touched my arm. "Let him finish," she whispered. "You've already got what matters." I didn't respond, but I nodded. After Ethan finished his speech, capped with a dramatic "rest easy, old man," he stepped down to polite applause. Polite. That word stung. Because real grief isn't polite. It's messy. It shakes your chest. It makes your knees give out when no one's watching. It doesn't wear a Rolex or drink macchiatos on the way to a eulogy. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it short. No theatrics. Just truth. Dad loved this place. The cabin. The trees. The water. And he loved peace, the quiet kind. The kind you can only hear when you stop trying to fill every silence. He wasn't perfect, but he was present. And for me, that was everything. I looked up. He gave me roots. That's all I'll ever need. Then I stepped down. After the service, people lingered. Neighbors brought casseroles. Former ranger friends shared stories about trail rescues and campfire mishaps. One woman cried while telling me how Dad helped her find her lost dog in the woods back in '03. Ethan wandered through the crowd like a politician, shaking hands and collecting condolences like business cards. When he reached me, he didn't hug me. He just clapped a hand on my shoulder and said, "Hell of a turnout, huh?" "Yeah," I said flatly. "Hell of a man." He smirked. "Hope you're ready to start talking logistics." "I've got a few ideas." My stomach twisted. "Can we not do this today?" He held up his hands. Of course. Of course. Just saying, a lot of potential here. That night, back at the cabin, the house was too quiet. Guests were gone. The casserole dishes were stacked on the counter. The fireplace burned low, casting flickering shadows on the stone hearth. I sat alone at the dining table, staring at Dad's ranger hat sitting on the sideboard. Then I remembered the letter. The one Diane had handed me the day Dad transferred the deed. I went to the drawer, pulled it out. The envelope was still sealed, my name, written in that familiar, angular handwriting. For Avery only if necessary. But now felt like the time. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, on a single sheet of lined paper, were words I didn't realize I needed. Avery, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I want you to know I never doubted you. Not once. Not even when you stayed quiet while your brother talked louder. You're the one who listened, who stayed, who saw the worth in what the world overlooked. That's why I gave you the cabin. Not because you asked, but because you never did. Be smart. Be steady. And when the moment comes, speak only when it matters. Love you, son. Always. Dad. I folded the letter, pressed it to my chest, and exhaled. Ethan might have given a better performance at the funeral, but Dad had already given me the truth. And a quiet kind of power. It was a Wednesday morning, just 3 weeks after the funeral. I was sipping coffee in the cabin's kitchen, the same ceramic mug Dad used every morning chipped on the rim, when my phone buzzed. Text from Harper Realty Listings. Com. New property alert. Modern rustic lakefront getaway. Crescent Lake. 3BR 2BA fully renovated $849,000. Agent. Ethan Clark, private seller. I nearly dropped my mug. I clicked the link. And there it was. Our cabin. Only it didn't look like our cabin. The photos showed sleek white walls, abstract art, glossy countertops that had never existed. The living room was staged with generic mid-century furniture. The wood-burning stove had been edited out, replaced by a modern gas insert. Even the front porch had been airbrushed to remove the scratch marks where Tiller used to paw at the door. It was like someone had photoshopped the soul out of the place, and then they priced it like a product. $849,000. Cash preferred. Immediate availability. I stared at the screen for a long time. I wasn't even surprised that Ethan was behind this. But something about seeing the digital erasure of our history, our legacy, it hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just that he was selling something that didn't belong to him. It was that he was rewriting the story to make it palatable for strangers, and pretending no one else had ever lived here at all. I called Diane immediately. She answered on the second ring. "Let me guess," she said. "You saw the listing." "Yes. He's moving faster than I thought. He's calling himself the private seller, which makes the listing fraudulent and actionable," she said calmly. "But we don't move yet." "Why not?" "Because he hasn't technically sold anything yet. And the longer he builds his case on air, the harder it falls when we pull the rug out." I exhaled through my nose. "So I just sit here and watch him stage a home that isn't his?" "No," she said. "You document every change, every email, every photo. Screen record the listing, save the metadata, take time-stamped photos of the cabin. Everything we can use. What about the buyers? They'll show up soon. Probably this weekend. And when they do, we'll be ready." Sure enough, that Saturday, a luxury SUV pulled into the gravel drive. 2 people got out, the Harpers, I would later learn. Thomas and Emily, mid-40s, matching Patagonia jackets. The kind of couple who used space as a noun and drank cold-pressed green juice religiously. Ethan arrived 10 minutes later in a blazer and boots that had never seen mud. I watched from the forest line tucked behind a cedar tree with my camera zoomed in. He gave them the grand tour, gestured broadly, pointed at the lake, laughed at some imagined joke. He opened the front door like a game show host revealing the prize. "Welcome to your dream," I heard him say. They walked through what used to be our home. He was trying to sell them the wallpaper of our lives. That evening, I went inside. The stager had added minimalist wall art, removed the braided rugs Mom had made years ago, and even swapped out the old rocking chair for a geometrically impossible bench made of reclaimed ironwood. It was a set piece now, a showroom. I walked into the bedroom and opened the closet. My father's ranger jacket was gone. So were the fishing rods he'd stored under the bed. The bookshelf had been emptied and replaced with IKEA props. He had taken everything real and hidden it, or worse, trashed it. I opened my phone and started taking photos. Corner to corner, shelf to shelf, door knobs, baseboards, light fixtures, anything I recognized. Then I sent them all to Diane. The next morning, Ethan texted, "Showings went great. Got an offer already. Cash buyers. $50K over asking. No inspection." He added a thumbs-up emoji. My hands shook. "You don't own the property, Ethan." "Don't start this," he replied. "You're just bitter." You didn't think of it first. You're going to get sued. By who? Dad's not here anymore. That line made my vision blur. That night, I opened the sealed letter again. Dad's handwriting firm and unpretentious. Be smart. Be steady. And when the moment comes, speak only when it matters. I folded it back and sat in the dark cabin for a while, lit only by the flicker of a dying fire and the buzzing sound of strangers offering cash for a life they didn't help build. Ethan was about to learn something he'd never understood. That ownership isn't just about paperwork. It's about proof, legacy, timing. And I had all three. The moment I hit send on the email to Diane with the photos, the videos, and the full real estate listing Ethan had posted, I felt a shift in the air. This was it. The turning point. All the months of waiting, watching, keeping calm while Ethan ran his one-man performance. It was time to end the show. Diane replied 10 minutes later. Subject: Well done, Avery. Everything you documented is exactly what we need. We're moving forward. Her next email had a list of steps. Cease and desist letter prepared and ready for delivery. Formal notice of ownership to be sent to the buyer's agent and title company. Scheduling a pre-closing meeting, all parties required to attend. She signed off with, "He's walking into a room he doesn't realize you own." 3 days later, I sat across from her at her office, folder in hand, heartbeat steady. Diane poured us both tea, something herbal that smelled like rosemary and lemon, and pulled out a thick binder from her cabinet. "This is the full package," she said, laying it in front of me. "Recorded deed, tax transfer, insurance policy reassignments, plus your father's signed affidavit confirming intent." I nodded, flipping through the pages. Each document was a wall, and Ethan had just run headfirst into them. "He's listed himself as sole owner in the sale agreement?" Diane asked. "Yes," I said. "His name is the only one on the MLS entry. He signed a seller's disclosure claiming full authority." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "That's fraud," I figured. "And the buyers, Thomas and Emily Harper, seem like good people, rich but not jerks. They have no idea. Then our job is to stop them before they lose anything." She leaned forward. "Let me ask you plainly, Avery. Do you want to take this public now? Or do we let him walk into the closing table and destroy himself?" I didn't hesitate. Let him walk in. The next few days passed like a slow drumbeat. I went back to the cabin and cleaned out what I could. The old quilt from the linen chest. Dad's ranger boots from the back of the closet. His half-used shaving kit still faintly smelling of cedar and pine. I left the fake furniture untouched. The ugly faux rustic lamp. The art that looked like it had been pulled from a corporate waiting room. Let the stage remain set. Ethan was still under the illusion that the play was going well. He called me once just to gloat. "Thought you'd want to know the Harpers are signing this weekend. Full price. No hiccups. Told you this place had value." I smiled to myself. "That's great. Hope it all goes smoothly." He paused, almost suspicious. "You're being weirdly cool about this. Maybe I've just accepted things." "Yeah, well, maybe you should have thought bigger, like I did." I ended the call politely, then texted Diane, "Let's make it happen." The pre-closing meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning at 10. The location, a neutral law office in town arranged by the title company. I arrived early. Button-down shirt, clean jeans, folder under my arm, calm. Diane met me outside. "You ready?" I nodded. Inside, the Harpers were already seated. Thomas was thumbing through paperwork. Emily was tapping something on her phone, brows slightly furrowed. Their agent, a man named Jeffrey with perfect hair and a nervous smile, looked up at me with confusion as I entered. And then Ethan walked in. Polo shirt under a blazer, sunglasses on his head, wearing confidence like a second skin. He paused slightly when he saw me seated beside Diane. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said. "I live here," I replied. "Unlike you." He scoffed and took a seat across from us. Then the title rep, a woman named Monica, entered with a stack of forms. "Let's begin," she said. The opening statements were routine. Monica went over the deed history, the pending title transfer, and the seller's representations. And then Diane leaned forward. "Before we go further," she said calmly, "there's a matter of ownership we need to clarify." Ethan blinked. "What?" Diane slid the folder across the table. This is the recorded quitclaim deed dated 6 months prior to Mr. Clark's passing. Walter Clark, while alive and of sound mind, legally transferred full ownership of the Crescent Lake property to his son, Avery Clark. The room froze. Ethan stared at the folder like it had just sprouted fangs. "That's not possible," he said. "It's not only possible," Diane replied. "It's legal binding and recorded with the county." Monica opened the documents, flipping through. "The county records show this transfer. Yes, it supersedes the will." Emily Harper glanced at Thomas, clearly alarmed. "What does this mean for us?" she asked. Jeffrey, the agent, looked like someone had punched him in the lungs. I wasn't aware of this." "You weren't told," Diane clarified, "because Mr. Ethan Clark misrepresented himself as sole owner and fraudulently attempted to sell property he doesn't own." Ethan stood suddenly. "This is a setup." "No," I said, my voice steady. "This is the truth. You tried to sell something that wasn't yours." He turned to Monica. "You can't just let them do this." Monica removed her glasses. "Mr. Clark, did you sign an affidavit last week asserting you were the sole title holder?" Ethan didn't answer. "That document is a legal attestation. If proven false, it opens the door to civil liability, possibly criminal." The Harpers stood up. "This deal is off," Thomas said firmly. "We want our deposit back, and a record of this deception." "It will be refunded," Monica assured him. Ethan looked at me, furious, confused, cornered. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Since before Dad died." "Why didn't you tell me?" I stood. "Because you would have tried to take it anyway." After the truth came out at the title office, the illusion shattered fast. The listing didn't just die, it imploded. Within hours of the meeting, the Harpers pulled their offer and posted a sharp public review of Ethan's behavior. Jeffrey, their agent, contacted the agency's legal team and promptly removed the cabin from the MLS database. And by that evening, Diane forwarded me a formal letter from the title company. Due to misrepresentation by the seller and a confirmed title discrepancy, escrow has been canceled. All parties are advised to refrain from further transactions on the property until rightful ownership is acknowledged and verified by legal counsel. Translation: Ethan's game was over. The next morning, I returned to the cabin. The for sale sign that had once stood proudly by the gravel driveway now lay face down in the dirt. I left it there. Inside, the furniture remained staged, soulless, and polished, like it was waiting for a real estate brochure that would never come. But something about the silence felt different now. Lighter. I was no longer the one with the secret. He was. Around noon, I heard tires crunching gravel. I looked out the window and saw Ethan's SUV pull in fast, too fast, as if momentum could fix everything. He stepped out, slamming the door behind him, phone pressed to his ear. "No, Diane's bluffing. There's no way it's legally binding. He doesn't even live here." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me standing in the doorway. I opened the screen door slowly. "You're trespassing," I said. "This is still my property," he shot back. I raised an eyebrow. "County records disagree." He ended the call and marched up the steps. "You set me up," he hissed. "You embarrassed me in front of real clients." "You lied," I said. "Repeatedly. Publicly. Legally." He laughed bitterly, pacing the porch. "You don't get it, do you? This was never about you. It was about making the most of what Dad left behind." "You mean cashing in on it?" "Why shouldn't I?" he snapped. "He gave you everything behind my back." "No," I corrected, stepping forward. "He gave me the cabin because I loved it. Because I stayed. Because I didn't see it as a payday." He pointed toward the woods. "You think I didn't love this place? I grew up here too. You were never here." His shoulders tensed. "You left. You stayed gone. And then you came back only when Dad was too sick to argue." That one hit. He didn't deny it. "I was going to use the money for Mom," he said quietly. I froze. "What?" "She's sick. In Florida." "You didn't know." "No," I said. "Because you never said a word. Not to me. Not to Dad. She didn't want us to know. But I found out after he died." He looked away. "I thought if I could sell the place fast, I could cover her surgery. Or maybe just get her out of the facility." I didn't know what to say. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the older brother I used to look up to, the one who taught me how to skip stones, how to bait a hook. But only for a second. Why didn't you just ask? I finally said, because you wouldn't have said yes. He answered, you would have hidden behind paperwork, like you always do. I crossed my arms. No, I would have protected the place. Like Dad asked me to. He scoffed. Convenient how his dying wish just happened to benefit you, huh? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. You're going to regret this, he said. Maybe, I replied, but not today. He stood there for a long beat, jaw tight, breathing hard. Then he turned, walked to the yard, and kicked the for sale sign over completely. It cracked in the middle. Somehow it felt symbolic. He stood over it for a second, then walked back to his SUV and peeled off tires, spitting gravel into the air. And just like that, the listing, the lie, the illusion he'd built, was gone. That night, I stood in the cabin alone. No buyers, no agents, no posturing. Just me. I started unpacking Dad's old things, rehanging his ranger cap, placing the quilt back on the bed, unwrapping the framed photo of us on the dock the summer I turned 9. It felt like I was restoring something deeper than a house. I was restoring truth. The next day, Diane called. Heard he's threatening legal action, she said dryly. I figured, he won't win. I know. She paused. You okay? I don't know. Another pause. That's honest, she said. But you did the right thing, Avery. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it. It will. I asked her if we could take the next step, officially notifying the county to flag the title so no future fraudulent listing could even begin. She said she'd already started the paperwork. Your father would be proud, she added. I hope so. No, I know so. The listing was dead, but something else had been reborn. A boundary. A line in the dirt that said, this is where legacy lives and lies die. The legal battle was over. The listing was gone. Ethan had left. But the damage, that stayed. Because while Ethan couldn't take the title, he'd already taken pieces of the place. Pieces no paperwork could restore. I discovered it on a Tuesday afternoon. I had returned to the cabin with the intention of reclaiming, repairing, rebuilding. Instead, I walked into an inventory of loss. The first thing I noticed was the wall by the hallway. It used to hold 3 frames, one with a photo of Dad in his ranger uniform, one of me and Ethan fishing on the dock when we were kids, and one of Mom laughing in the kitchen covered in flour. Now only 2 remained. The one of Mom was gone. I checked the side tables, the storage trunk, even under the bed. Nothing. That's when the dread set in. I grabbed a notepad and pen and started going room by room. Living room. Grandfather's clock missing. Leather-bound edition of Leaves of Grass gone. Rocking chair cushion replaced with some gray IKEA thing. Quilt my grandmother made in '78 gone. Master bedroom. Dad's Ranger badge collection missing. The antique jewelry box from Grandma May gone. Mom's engagement ring and wedding band both missing. Kitchen. The cast iron skillet with the burn mark. Gone. Ceramic spice rack hand-painted with forest animals. Gone. The mismatched mugs Dad refused to throw out. Replaced with a matching white set labeled Property of Staging Company. It was like someone had vacuumed the soul out of the house. I sat down at the kitchen table, the notebook heavy in my hand. This wasn't just stuff. These were artifacts. They held the weight of birthdays, holidays, and Sunday mornings. They were the texture of memory, and now they were missing. And I knew who had taken them. Ethan hadn't just tried to sell the house. He had tried to sell us. That night, I called Diane. I need to add something to the file, I said. She answered instantly. What's missing? I read her the list. Each item felt like a wound. Do you have proof they were originally there? She asked. Photos. Some. The family albums. Maybe even Dad's video backups. But it's not about the resale value. It never is, she replied. But documenting it gives us leverage. If you decide to pursue compensation for unauthorized removal, this list matters. I hesitated. He stole more than things, Diane. I know. The next morning, I went through Dad's digital archive. He had been quietly scanning old photos and videos in his last year, organizing them on a USB labeled for Avery. I plugged it in. There were hundreds of files folders marked by year, event, even season. And there in a photo dated July 2011 was Mom's jewelry box sitting on the dresser. In a video from Thanksgiving 2005, the clock chimed behind Dad as he carved turkey, his laughter echoing through the kitchen. Each image was a timestamp proof that what had been there was no longer. I dragged them all into a folder titled Evidence of Removal. 2 days later, Diane and I drafted the formal notice of asset dispute. It didn't accuse Ethan of theft, not yet, but it made clear that certain items were removed without the knowledge or consent of the legal property owner, and that restitution or return would be formally requested. She mailed it to Ethan's new address in Tacoma. We never got a response. But that wasn't the point. The point was naming the loss. The point was refusing to pretend nothing had happened. I spent the next week trying to recover what I could. I visited antique stores, pawn shops, even a local estate sale reseller. Sometimes I found nothing. Sometimes I found things that looked almost like what had been ours, but never quite. Until one day, in a glass case at a secondhand shop 2 towns over, I found it. Mom's engagement ring. The small ruby inset with 2 gold leaves on either side. It was unmistakable. I bought it back without hesitation. No questions asked. When I got home, I placed it on the windowsill above the kitchen sink where Mom always left it while doing dishes. It caught the light. It felt like a piece of us had returned. That night, I made a fire in the living room. I wrapped myself in a backup quilt and sat on the rug watching flames flicker in the stone hearth. The air smelled of cedar and wood smoke. I opened my notebook and crossed off one item. Mom's ring found. A small victory, but a meaningful one. Because sometimes healing starts with recovery. Sometimes it begins simply by not forgetting what was lost. I closed the notebook, leaned back, and whispered into the stillness. Dad, I'm still looking. I'll find it all, even if it takes time. Somewhere deep in the silence, I felt the house exhale, as if it was grateful someone still remembered what mattered. I thought it was over. I thought Ethan had disappeared, finally accepting the truth. The paperwork. The facts he couldn't rewrite. But men like my brother don't fade out quietly. They circle back, and they bring storms with them. It was a Thursday evening just past 6. The air was thick with the kind of stillness that comes before rain. I had spent the day restoring the back deck, the one Dad and I rebuilt the summer before he got sick. I had just packed up the tools when I heard the sound of tires on gravel. I stepped around the cabin, and there he was, Ethan. Same SUV, same smug look, but this time dulled, less sharp, more cracked. He stepped out slowly, like he wasn't sure what version of me he was about to face. I stood on the edge of the porch, arms crossed. He stayed at the bottom step. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Then he said, "You made your point." I didn't move. "I'm not here to fight," he added. "Good," I said. "Because you lost." He nodded, biting his lip, looking down at the wooden steps. "Then you found Mom's ring." "Yes." "And the clock?" "Gone." He winced, just barely. "I didn't sell it. I just stored some things. Thought I'd be moving them once the sale closed." "There was no sale, Ethan. There never could be. I get that now." He took a deep breath, glanced at the lake. "This place looks different." I shrugged. "It remembers." He looked at me again. "I came to say something." "Then say it." He walked up one step. I didn't back down. "I thought I deserved it," he said finally. "The house, the money, the control. I was the older brother. The one who left to build something. The one who thought he could fix everything with a check." He paused. "But I was wrong." That caught me off guard. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. He continued. "I wasn't here when it mattered. Not for Dad. Not for you. I thought I could swoop in at the end. Smooth things over. Make it look like I was involved." I said nothing. He stepped up again now, just below me on the porch. "But I wasn't here. Not really." And he knew it. His voice cracked slightly. "He gave this place to the one who showed up." The rain started in light drops. Soft. Uneven. Barely audible over the trees. Ethan glanced up at the sky, then back at me. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "But I am sorry. For what I tried to do. For how I handled everything." I finally spoke. "You stole memories, Ethan. I know. You gutted the house and turned it into a showroom. You erased Mom? You buried Dad's things like they were trash." He flinched. I didn't see it that way until I walked back in. He gestured toward the windows. It doesn't feel like it used to. It's not supposed to. He stood there soaked now. No umbrella. No excuses. I didn't come back to take anything he said. I just needed to see it one last time. Before I let it go, I narrowed my eyes. And you mean that? He nodded. I mean it. I studied him for a long second. Then I stepped aside. Come in, I said. One time. Inside the cabin was warm. I had left the fire going in the hearth. The smell of pine and coffee drifted through the air. He walked slowly like a man stepping into a cathedral. He looked at the photos on the wall, the ranger cap on the hook, the freshly repaired rocking chair in the corner. This is how it should have looked, he murmured. I poured him a cup of coffee. He took it with both hands like it might break. We sat at the table, the same one we'd shared countless childhood breakfasts around. He stared into his mug. I remember the first time Dad let me chop wood, he said quietly. I was 10. Split my shin open the first swing. Bled all over the porch. He didn't yell, I added. Just handed you a towel and said, try again tomorrow. He smiled, but it was faint. I wanted him to be proud of me, Ethan said, but I was always running too far ahead to notice when he already was. I leaned back. He wasn't perfect, but he wanted peace, and he wanted this place preserved. Ethan nodded. And you did that. We finished our coffee in silence. Eventually he stood. I won't come back. I mean it. I stood too. There's nothing left to take. He gave a half laugh. You're right. Then he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out something wrapped in flannel, set it on the table. What is it? I asked. Grandma May's jewelry box, he said. It's the real one. I stared. I didn't pawn it, he added quickly. I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted something that still felt like family. I picked it up. It was hers. Worn delicate with the initials carved into the lid. Thanks, I said softly. I'm sorry, he repeated. I nodded. I know. He stepped back outside into the soft rain. As he reached the bottom step, he looked back. Tell the cabin I said goodbye. It already knows. And then he left. This time for good. After Ethan left, the cabin felt quieter. Not the kind of silence that comes from emptiness, but the kind that follows a storm. The kind that lets you breathe again. The rain had stopped. The lake was still, and inside it felt like something had settled. I stood at the kitchen table holding Grandma May's jewelry box, the one Ethan had returned. I ran my fingers over the carved initials on the lid. C. May Clark. It felt like holding a piece of the house's heartbeat. I took it to the living room and sat by the fireplace, setting it gently in my lap. The box clicked open like it had been waiting. Inside was the ruby engagement ring, the one Mom wore every day, even while gardening. Dad used to joke that she'd dig potatoes like royalty. The ruby still glowed deep in crimson, set between two delicate gold leaves. It wasn't flashy, but it was unmistakably hers. Next to it, tucked beneath a velvet divider, was something I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. A stack of letters, tied together with a faded green ribbon. I pulled them out slowly, reverently. The first envelope had a date scrawled in pencil. March 3rd, 1983. The handwriting was unmistakable. Walter Clark. I unfolded the first page and began to read. Dear Ellie, today I sat by the lake and watched the ice melt. Reminds me of you, how your warmth shows up quietly and changes everything before anyone notices. I miss your laugh echoing down the cabin hallway. I miss the smell of bread baking on Sundays. Mostly I miss you sitting across from me like it's the only place either of us belongs. Spring's coming. I hope you do too. Love. I set the page down, blinking hard. These weren't just love letters. They were timestamps, evidence, echoes. I read for hours. Letters dated before I was born. Letters from Dad to Mom while she stayed with her sister during a tough winter. Letters from Mom written on torn notepad paper filled with scribbled shopping lists and secret wishes. I hope one day Avery sees the lake the way we do. Don't let Ethan skip his homework again. He's too charming for his own good. Tell the cabin I miss it. And you. Some made me laugh. Some made me cry. Some made me feel like I was listening to their voices through the walls, like they were still here having a quiet conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. One envelope caught my eye. No date. No stamp. Just my name on the front. Avery. The handwriting was shakier. Dad's in his final year. I opened it carefully. Son, if you're reading this, it means you've found the box and everything inside it. I wanted you to have this, not just because it's full of things, but because it's full of us. These letters, they're your story too. The love that made you, the grief that shaped us. The reason this cabin always meant more than just lumber and nails. I hope one day if you have someone to love, you'll show them this ring. Tell them about the lake, about your mother, about the firelight and the pancakes on Sunday, about how some homes aren't bought, they're earned. If you're sitting by the fire right now, I hope you feel us with you. I hope you know how proud I am of the man you became. All my love. Dad. I folded the letter slowly, held it against my chest, and exhaled. The fire crackled softly behind me. Outside the rain began again, but this time it was gentler, as if even the sky was mourning something it hadn't understood until now. I didn't sleep in the bedroom that night. I stayed right there, curled up on the rug with the jewelry box beside me. The letters fanned across the floor like old maps. At one point, I thought I heard the porch boards creak. I imagined Dad standing there, mug in hand, watching me like he used to, not saying anything, just there. The next morning, I made pancakes. No measuring, just memory. Burned the first batch like always. Sat at the table with syrup and butter and a quiet smile on my face. I placed Mom's ring in a small glass dish and set it in the center of the table. Not as decoration, as tribute. Later, I wrapped the letters back in their ribbon and placed them gently into the jewelry box. Then I wrote a new one. To whoever finds this next. If you're reading this, it means this cabin is still standing. I hope it still smells like pine. I hope the floor still creaks near the hallway. I hope someone's still making pancakes on Sunday mornings. This house isn't just ours. It's everyone's who remembers. Welcome home, Avery Clark. I tucked it beneath Dad's last letter, closed the lid, and for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers in wood grain, in creaky stairs, in half-filled nail holes, in a rocking chair missing its cushion, in the stillness after someone leaves or never comes back. That's what the rebuild was for me. Not revenge, not decoration, not resale value, just a return to what was, to what mattered, to what could still be. I started with the porch. The boards were warped uneven from years of moss and misuse. I pulled up each plank one by one, stacking them in careful piles, like chapters from a weathered book. Underneath, I found things I had forgotten. A tin whistle I lost when I was 7. One of Dad's old fishing lures, rusted but intact. Even a tiny toy car Ethan must have dropped decades ago, the same kind he used to race along the windowsills. Memories beneath the floorboards. I placed them all in a small box marked found. Not for display, just to keep. Then I began laying new planks. Not perfect ones, but sturdy, honest wood. Ones I chose myself, one by one. Inside, the work was slower. I removed every soulless piece the staging company had left behind. The geometric lamp, the faux minimalist coffee table, the matching white mugs that had never held real conversation. Gone. Instead, I began bringing things home. The woven chair from the attic, Dad's maps of the state parks, Mom's recipe box. I hung the photo of us on the dock where it belonged, just above the stone fireplace. Next to it, I placed a carved wooden sign I made one rainy night in the shed. Clark Cabin, established in memory. Not for guests. Not for Instagram. Just for us. Every room had something to fix. And with every fix, a memory returned. In the kitchen, I reinstalled the old spice rack, faded and chipped, but still smelling faintly of rosemary. In the hallway, I rehung the grandfather clock. Not the original, Ethan never returned it, but a near match I found in a local shop. It didn't tick exactly the same, but the chime echoed just right. In the bedroom, I replaced the new synthetic mattress with the old spring one from storage. Uneven, familiar, real. I didn't rush. I gave myself months. The cabin had waited years to breathe again. It could wait a little longer while I helped it remember how. I fixed what needed fixing, and left what needed to stay broken. The window by the breakfast nook that fogged in the mornings, still there. The kitchen drawer that stuck unless you pulled it sideways first, still stubborn. The pine step that creaked just before the hallway, Still loud. Dad called those imperfections personality. Now I called them home. Some days I cried. Not big tears. Just the kind that arrive quietly while sanding an old cabinet and realizing your hands move just like your father's used to. Some days I laughed. Usually alone. Like when I found one of Ethan's carved initials behind the upstairs closet along with a crude drawing of a dinosaur and the words, "Do not tell Mom." Some days I said nothing at all. Just worked. Just listened. To the sound of rain on the roof. To the whisper of wind in the trees. To the heartbeat of a house learning how to be whole again. Neighbors stopped by sometimes. People who had known Dad. Old friends from the ranger station. Locals who remembered Mom's baking. They'd step inside and pause at the doorway, eyes wide. "It feels the same," they'd say. And I'd nod quietly proud. They'd bring jars of jam. Warm bread. One woman even returned a chipped mixing bowl she'd borrowed 5 years before Dad got sick. "I think this belongs here more than it does in my cupboard," she said, setting it gently on the counter. I didn't disagree. One afternoon in mid-spring, I sat on the dock with a mug of coffee and looked back at the cabin. The sun hit the roof just right. The chimney smoked like a signal. The porch rail was finally fixed. It didn't look like a house that had survived betrayal. It looked like a house that had survived love. Because love, real love, leaves fingerprints in corners and nail holes in baseboards. It leaves notes in recipe boxes and initials on tree trunks. Love stays, even when people don't. Later that evening, I lit a fire in the hearth and sat beside it with Mom's jewelry box in my lap. The letters were still there, unopened since that night. I wasn't ready to read more yet, but I didn't need to, not right now, because the walls were already telling me stories. The photos were already singing, and the silence finally felt like peace. The cabin had grown used to solitude again. Evenings by the fire, mornings with coffee on the dock. The days were slow, steady, predictable in a way that grief never was. I had finally finished the last coat of paint on the upstairs hallway. The walls were now a soft, warm pine, and I'd just rehung an old photo of Dad and me at the ranger station. Everything had started to settle. Until the knock came. It was a soft knock, not urgent, not timid, just present. 3 taps. I glanced at the clock. Phew, 16 p.m. Unusual for visitors at that hour. The neighbors never knocked. They just called out my name and stepped in, usually with muffins or tomatoes. I opened the door cautiously, and there she was. A woman maybe early 60s. Gray streaks in her auburn hair loosely tied back. Soft brown coat. A leather bag slung over one shoulder. She looked like someone who traveled often, not far, but always with purpose. Her eyes met mine. Kind. Searching. "Hi," she said. "You must be Avery." I nodded slowly, confused. "Yes. Can I help you?" She offered a gentle smile. "I'm Elena. I knew your father." The name didn't ring a bell. I studied her more closely. Nothing threatening about her. No clipboard, no camera, no badge, just a quiet presence. She must have seen my hesitation. "We met many years ago," she said softly, "when your mother and father separated. Your dad and we had a short, careful friendship. Nothing improper. Just 2 people trying to survive something they didn't see coming." I blinked. "You were friends with him after Mom left?" She nodded. "Briefly. We lost touch after he went back to the cabin full-time. I moved south, got married, raised a daughter. But I read his obituary last fall, and I couldn't stop thinking about this place." She glanced past me toward the cabin's warm interior. This house meant so much to him, and I never got the chance to say goodbye. There was something honest about her. She didn't fidget. She didn't pretend to cry. She just stood there in the breeze like she belonged to a chapter I hadn't read yet. I stepped aside. "Come in." She entered slowly, reverently, like walking into a chapel. Her eyes traced the wood beams, the fireplace, the old coffee table I'd refinished by hand. Her lips parted slightly when she saw the photo of Dad over the hearth. She crossed the room and stood in front of it. "I always told him he had lighthouse eyes," she whispered. "The kind that always looked like they were watching over someone even when they were tired." I stayed by the door. "You said you weren't in touch." "We weren't," she replied. "But I never forgot him." She turned, smiling softly. And from the look of things, you didn't either. I offered her a seat and made tea, the only thing I had in surplus besides coffee and firewood. We sat by the fire as evening stretched long fingers across the sky. She told me stories, not dramatic ones, just quiet details. How Dad once brought her a pressed maple leaf from the trail because she mentioned it was her favorite tree. How he used to hum while repairing a broken screen door at her place. How he never talked about his divorce, only about his sons. Ethan and Avery, she said, pronouncing our names like they were written in a book she'd read more than once. He loved you both, deeply, in such different ways. I looked at my mug. He never talked about that time. She nodded. I figured he wasn't proud of being lost. Neither was I said quietly. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I debated bringing this, she said, but I think it belongs here. She handed it to me. It was a letter, my father's handwriting, unsent. Elena, I hope you're well. I hope the leaves are changing where you are, the way they are here. The cabin is quiet again. The boys are growing faster than I can write about them. Avery is the quiet kind, the kind who listens to trees. Ethan is the wind. He moves fast, always elsewhere, always chasing. I think I miss you more in the silence, not because we said so much, but because I knew you heard the things I never had to explain. If I never send this, maybe it's because I never knew what to do with gratitude. Or goodbyes. But thank you for walking beside me when I didn't know where I was going. Walter. My throat closed. I folded the letter and handed it back, but she shook her head. It belongs here now. We sat in silence for a while after that. The fire popped. Rain started again, light and steady. Elena finally stood. I don't want to intrude. I just needed to see it, to say goodbye, to know it was still loved. It is, I said, very much. She nodded. I'm glad it's in your hands. At the door, she hesitated, then turned back and asked, do you ever feel him here? I thought for a second. Not the way I expected, I said. Not like a ghost. More like a draft in the hallway, a creak at the right moment, the smell of pine in the middle of the night. She smiled. That sounds exactly like him. After she left, I returned to the fireplace, held the letter again, and for the first time I saw Dad not just as a father, but as a man, one who had tried, failed, loved, and let go. And in doing so, somehow found his way back home. Through me, through this place, through every letter he never sent, and every one I was still writing in my own way. Spring passed gently. The wind softened. The light stretched. The trees began to hum again, not loudly, but in the way old places do when they're finally allowed to rest. I found myself settling into a rhythm that felt like breathing. Wake with the sun. Walk the trails. Cook slow meals. Repair things that didn't need to be fixed, not because they were broken, but because I wanted to understand them. The cabin no longer felt like a place that held grief. It felt like a place that held time. I'd begun keeping a journal, something Dad used to do, not every day, just on the days that felt like chapters. I called it the final pages, but the more I wrote, the more I realized they weren't final at all. Just pages, honest ones, some heavy, some quiet, some filled with memories, others with blueprints, a map of a life unfolding slowly. One entry read, May 3rd. The back window rattles again. I thought about fixing it. But Dad used to say, if a place doesn't make a little noise, it's probably dead. So I let it rattle. It makes the silence feel less alone. Another said, May 9th. Replanted the garden. Used the same spot Mom always chose. Basil, tomatoes, and marigolds. The soil still remembers her hands. And then, this one, May 22nd. Got a letter from Ethan. Short. Said he found a few more things in storage. He's mailing them. No apology. But no venom either. Maybe that's enough. I didn't write for anyone but myself. No posts. No hashtags. No intention of turning this into a story to sell. It was just for me, and maybe someday for someone who came after me. I kept Dad's letters in a cedar box by the bookshelf. Mom's ring stayed in its dish above the sink. The jewelry box was back in its rightful place on the dresser in the bedroom facing the window that caught the last light of day. Every piece had found its way home. One day, I walked down to the dock and sat with my feet in the water. I brought a new notebook, blank, untitled, but I already knew the first line. This place wasn't given to me. It was entrusted, because that's what Dad had done. Not gifted, entrusted, with memory, with silence, with care, not to keep it locked in the past, but to carry it forward. I thought a lot about legacy, how it isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a shelf of old coffee mugs no one can throw away. Sometimes it's the way a door sticks and nobody fixes it because that's just how the door is. Sometimes legacy is the sound a house makes at night that lets you know you're not alone. Sometimes it's the people who still come not to take, but to remember. And sometimes it's just one person sitting by a fire making pancakes and keeping a promise. One morning, I found a folded newspaper in the mailbox. No name, no note, just one article circled. It was about a historical preservation grant, something for family properties with documented generational history and ecological ties to the region. The Clark cabin qualified. I smiled. Maybe it was Diane. Maybe it was Ethan. Maybe it was no one I'd ever know. But the message was clear. Keep it alive. So I applied. Not to turn the place into a museum, just to protect it, to make sure future generations could sit by this lake and feel what I felt, that sense of stillness you can't buy or build overnight. That kind of stillness has to be earned, lived, watered with grief, carved by love. Later that night, I added a new entry to the journal, June 7th. The application's in. Whatever happens, I've already saved the most important parts. The photos. The stories, the light through the trees, the fire crackle after a storm. It's all here now, not behind glass, but in the walls, in the soil, in me. That evening, I made pancakes. I burned the first one again. Some traditions never change. And I laughed, out loud, alone, at the absurd joy of it. Then I poured another cup of coffee, sat by the fire, and opened my notebook to the next blank page. No title yet. No outline, just space. And sometimes space is the most sacred thing you can have. There are two kinds of inheritance. The kind written in wills, carved into deeds, stamped and notarized, passed through courts and contracts. And then there's the kind that lives in the air of a place. In the way sunlight hits the window just so every morning. In the smell of coffee brewing in an old tin pot. In a drawer that sticks no matter how many times you sand it. That kind of inheritance isn't given. It's absorbed. Over time. Over years. Over love. It took me a long time to understand that. When Dad passed, I thought inheritance meant responsibility. Holding the line, defending what was his, proving I was worthy of it. Then Ethan tried to take it, and I thought inheritance meant protecting. But now I see it clearly. Inheritance isn't defense. It's devotion. I wake up early these days. Before the sun rises fully. The cabin is quiet in those hours, but not empty. Never empty. I hear the floor creak as I walk past the hallway photo wall. Dad in his ranger uniform, Mom with flour on her nose. Ethan and me in the tree house we once swore was a spaceship. I walk to the kitchen. The coffee pot hisses. I open the same cabinet Mom always used. The top hinge still groans like it's telling you not to rush. And I pour a mug. Same one Dad used. Still chipped. Still perfect. Outside the lake greets me. Today it's mirror still. Sometimes it's restless. Like people, like memory. I walk barefoot to the dock. Sit with the steam rising from my mug. This is the moment I understand it best. Not as a fight. Not as a task. But as a rhythm. To live here is not to preserve something old. It's to continue it. To listen. To add your verse. Some weeks ago, I got the official letter. The preservation grant was approved. They want to help keep the cabin intact, not to turn it into a tourist stop, but to protect the ecosystem, the craftsmanship, the story. All I had to do was promise I'd keep telling it. I signed the form, then added one more line beneath my signature. The house will stay in the family, because it already lives in us. Ethan hasn't been back. But he did send a final box. Inside were some old VHS tapes, our original Monopoly set, and a note with only 4 words. I hope it's enough. I didn't need more. Not everything needs an apology. Sometimes people just send what they can, and that's their version of healing. I've started hosting small weekends here. Friends. A cousin's kid who needed a place to write. A neighbor's niece who sketched wildflowers for her art portfolio. No one pays. But they all leave something behind. A note. A painting. A story. And in that way, the cabin keeps living. Not through bloodlines, but through belonging. I kept one page blank in the journal, labeled it next. Because someday someone else will sit here with coffee in hand, listening to the floor creak, hearing birds chatter like gossip in the trees, and they'll wonder what it all means. They'll open the cedar box, read the letters, and maybe they'll feel what I feel now. That you don't inherit land, you inherit care. You inherit the responsibility to remember and the freedom to let new memories grow. One morning last week, I walked to the dock and found a little pine cone resting on the top step, perfectly placed, almost like a gift. It reminded me of something Dad once said when I was 12. The forest doesn't ask you to own it, it just asks you to notice it. So I picked up the pine cone, set it on the windowsill, and I noticed. This morning, I wrote the final line in my journal. Then I closed it. Not with a sense of finality, but with peace. And I whispered just loud enough for the trees to hear. It's yours now, too. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever tried to hold on to a place, a person, a memory, then you understand. Inheritance is never about things. It's about what we choose to protect and how we choose to live. Subscribe for more stories where silence speaks louder than words. And tell me in the comments, what have you inherited that no one else can see?